On October 5th of this year, the government of Costa Rica sent to the Congress the bill for the control and regulation of cannabis so that adult use is legal and possible in our country. This project aims to legalize, control, and regulate the consumption, cultivation, production, and commercialization of cannabis for recreational purposes, and adds to the projects of the hemp agribusiness and medical cannabis, which are already legal in Costa Rica. Today, we will address important issues of this multi-million-dollar industry and its impact on society with Kenda Hansen, businesswoman, investor from the state of California in the United States, and vice president of the Hemp and Cannabis Council in Costa Rica. Thank you so much for being here, Kenda. We're very honored from Sfera to have you be a part of our webinar series regarding hemp and cannabis. So first and foremost, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, as an introduction, Kenda has a very extensive experience in the business world in the United States. And she also has connections more personal with Costa Rica. So we've had the chance to meet both for business and pleasure, and just learning about your trajectory, from university and everything you've done afterwards has been amazing. And then getting into the whole cannabis space, I think is incredible, especially, and it's something we're going to dig in during the interview, the whole being a woman in the cannabis space. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we can get into the topics we want to talk about.
So I started out actually in just hospitality. I was in managing restaurants and things like that. And I had a young child. And so, that just didn't work, the schedule for working nights and weekends. And my son had eczema. And so I started making my own products for him. And so the way that I really got into consumer goods and health was by making skincare for my son. And everybody said, hey, why don't you turn this into a business? So I started a skincare company with the first USDA certified organic baby and mommy products. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. And so I started and I launched that, and I quickly grew international and got into places like Whole Foods and big retail chains. And started to help formulations of other organic and natural products. So I was consulting a lot. And after a little stint after that, I went and did my MBA at Pepperdine. I just wanted to continue to learn about business and how I could, grow. And so I took a little break to be mom for a couple of years and was just investing in other companies. And I started to learn more about CBD, and my family had always been in cannabis from the illegal days, hippies. And so it's something I always knew about, but when I had back surgery and I injured myself, and back when I was about 31 years old, I had to have back surgery. And nothing was working. They wanted to give me pain pills for everything, right? So I was, not able to be a mom. I had a 1-year-old and a 7-year-old, and taking the pain meds, I just wasn't present. I wasn't able to really be there for them. And so somebody had suggested I use some cannabis topicals, and I started to use that for my pain. And once I started using that, it was like a light switch, all of a sudden I was like, why have I, a few months of taking things like Percocet and things like that, you feel kind of sleepy, lethargic. You just can't really be present with people. So taking that, it took away the pain, and I was able to function and be there. And so that kind of took me down the path of learning more about cannabis and CBD. And so in 2018, I founded a research company with somebody that I had gone to. She was a professor at Pepperdine, and she was into health as well. And so we both said, let's do some research, do some clinical trials in this area, and educate people on this. And so that's really what got me into this area.
Yeah, and you touched on so many subjects that are important, and obviously, health, maternity, being a woman in the space, education, and maybe one of the first things I want to dig into is job creation. With your background, having been in hospitality, and then let's say in the cosmetics part of it, but then linking it to the cannabis world, how have you seen the market grow in job creation in regards to this space?
Yeah. So, there's quite a bit of information out there in the US now. There's a platform called Leafly that we have, and they did a report. And they found that the US in 2020, I think we had about 77,000 employees in the cannabis sector. And then that grew the next year into 185,000 employees. And then in 2022, we had 428,000 employees in the cannabis sector. So you can see that the growth has been substantial, and if you're comparing that to like the financial industry had 145,000 jobs added last year. So that just kind of gives you some comparatives to see that it is a very viable industry, and that the opportunities, I think, are immense as it grows over. That's small compared to what they project, which is about 1.5 in the next couple of years. So that's definitely on the United States national scale. But I think in California, I want to say we have about 87,000 cannabis employees. It's bigger than how many cops we have. So that's interesting. But yeah, it's an absolute, burgeoning industry.
We always look up to much bigger economies like the US, like Canada, and there's several companies both in the US and Canada that have even gone public, right? Which is for us that it's an emerging market, and we just legalized, etc. It's amazing to see all these big names that are used to seeing in the stock exchange, and then seeing
Right.
Aurora and these types of companies that are just huge in the space. So we're also seeing it in Costa Rica. It's super new. There's a lot of loopholes, unfortunately, both in the regulations and in the law, but it always happens. And you and I spoke about it a lot, that we shouldn't be maybe scared or apprehensive on how the first regulations came out, because they usually change throughout the years. But we're seeing a lot more work, from the legal standpoint. We're seeing people from abroad, Costa Rican companies wanting to invest, and they're already hiring people. We have a lot of expats who've done this in the States for years, and now they're here, and then they find that their niche is finally legal and open. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see the numbers in Costa Rica as well.
Yeah. And that's just like a small, that's just cannabis numbers, all the skirting things like the banking and the labs and the CBD and clinical trials and research, those numbers don't even incorporate that, right? So it's much bigger than I think we can see right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you have waste management, you have security, you have health protocols, etc. So I agree. It's probably you could even double the numbers, because when you see, for example, the kind of requirements, regulations, both in the States, here, everywhere, what they ask you, it's not necessarily something that you can do, because it will be a conflict of interest, and you'll have to get a company whose expertise is that, and who they do waste management in other industries, and now they just have to accommodate to cannabis. So yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe jumping into the whole legalization process, there's always stigma, and I think even if there's been a very good work and again, we look to the US because you have done, really good campaigns, and associations, and a lot of NGOs have worked towards, sort of cleaning the face of the whole cannabis industry. Do you have any data or even your personal opinion on how legalization and the impact in crime that's linked to this has changed? And I think it's a really good time to talk about it due to Biden's pardons that happened in the last couple of weeks, and there's been a lot of talk about that.
Right. I mean, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, I think the U.S., we absolutely over-incarcerate people. And it's become something that has been kind of a for-profit situation where we have private companies that are, how basically running the jails and things of that nature. So they're incentivized to have people in jail, right? And that's a problem. But on the larger scale here is that we're spending money as taxpayers to put people in jail for things like possession of a small amount of marijuana. And when you consider that it's totally legal for us to have alcohol, it's totally illegal for us to have over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, and then people still go and drive with alcohol, they still go and do things that are unsafe. When you look at alcohol use and connect it to murder, that I think it was like 67% of murders have alcohol involved with them. So just to see that, but how many people are getting stoned and going and killing somebody? Like, it's just not, it's not a thing. So I think you have to have some perspective about it, that people are not necessarily criminals that are using cannabis, right? That people that are using cannabis are parents and people with cancer, and there's so many uses, people with anxiety, depression, and so that you can't necessarily criminalize, but you shouldn't criminalize people trying to take care of their health, right? And I think that, yes, it's a recreational use, people use it recreationally too, but I don't feel like it's any more dangerous than using alcohol. Alcohol is way more dangerous than cannabis, and we've legalized that. So it's really about putting things in place in our system that, just like our standards, our regulations, so that we protect people, right? So we have seen that we just released retroactively a whole bunch of people out of the system for cannabis use. And that, I feel like, was a big win for the cannabis industry. And also for all these families, the impact of that, that you have a father or a mother in jail. So now that the family's losing income because they're not working. So it's really a broader economic issue, which is when you have all these people in jail, you're not feeding the economics of your country, you're paying for them to be there, so then you're spending money. And so this is actually, it hinders us and hurts us to have people in jail for cannabis.
Because you mentioned before that it's not only recreational, it's not only your typical stoner who's just smoking for adult use, but you have people who are using it for medical purposes. And I know you and I talked about this a lot because of the foundation I run that's for special needs children. One of the biggest barriers we have prior to it being legalized here was how expensive it is in Costa Rica, and then the fact that the stigma, and we're talking even about CBD with no THC, right? Just the fact that it has cannabis. And with this opening of the market, now you're having parents whose kids are in the autism spectrum, who have all these even mental illnesses, who are opening up. Oh, I heard that this might be good. Can I go to a doctor that can give this to me? So, how has your experience been, or what how do you feel about the opening of the market towards the social equity behind being able to receive the medicine?
So, I mean, I feel like the social equity kind of is a different piece than the medicine, right? Like the social equity is about like being able to bring women into the industry, to bring people of color into the industry. And so when we look at like the current market here in the US, we see that executive women only make up about 33% of the cannabis industry, and minorities make 13%, right? So those are really small numbers. It's really led by white men in the, like many industries, right? And so we're kind of working to break down those barriers here, and I think it's happening slowly but surely. But I think when you are just going into that in Costa Rica, where you're just starting to open up this market, it's important to consider, how do you create equity across the board with businesses, right? How do you make sure that that women have opportunity? Because here in the US, when it comes to access to venture capital, so startup money to build your company, it's predominantly men, and it's people that they went to school with, and it's the old boys club, right? And so women don't tend to have that in the same way, right? And so how do we, especially in Costa Rica, how do we create that kind of equality for women by creating funds, giving support from the beginning, so that you have across the board that all of these licenses that are given out, these different areas of the industry, that they can participate in. And I think that's going to be really important. I think as you start to delve into all this, that there becomes kind of regulations around this, right? Because when you don't incorporate that, it's really nice to say, but people don't really act on it, right? So how do you how do you create an ecosystem there where that makes it a priority?
Something very interesting about our law, and I know it's something that didn't happen in a lot of countries where it's legal, is that we did allocate 40% of licenses to agricultural co-ops, indigenous groups, small and medium-sized companies. So
Right.
I think that was a really good step in the right direction. Obviously, that does not necessarily include women, and I something interesting that has happened to me in the last couple of years that I've been part, of the industry, or just advocating for the legalization in Costa Rica, is that people often question the fact that, oh, but you're a lawyer. You're a lawyer. It's an industry that usually does not want to touch anything that has to do with industry, especially prior to it being legal. Then people realize that there's money in it, and et cetera, and everyone comes in, and now everyone's a cannabis expert. But back then, nobody really wanted to touch the law. Nobody wanted to be a part of it. And they usually question the fact that I'm a lawyer, the fact that I'm young, and the fact that I'm a woman, and that I'm, let's say, formal in their mind and not a hippie, or, so the stigma remains. It's incredible in anything you do, right?
Yeah. Clearly, if you're in the cannabis industry, you should be, a stoner and a hippie. I mean, it's definitely, we've seen a huge shift in our events. So if you go to like MJ BizCon here, which is one of the bigger events, years ago, I mean, it was people in their kind of street clothes and casual and stoners. And then, over the past 5 years, like every year you would see more suits and more executives. And so it's definitely evolved. And I'm sure that people are surprised to see that, because they have this idea in their mind of what it looks like.
Is there anything on the educational part where you feel there's something we can do, or that you've seen that has worked in the States to get the message out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, like, when I entered into the organics industry 20 something years ago, right? It was still, even though, I mean, my parents were hippies, we were going to natural food stores back in the 80s and 90s, and so, but it became very mainstream, and it was so much education that went into every product for people to understand, which is commonplace now. We talk about, the leaching of plastics, this ingredient's not safe. You have websites now devoted to safe skincare and things like that. Well, 20 years ago, that wasn't a conversation that was really happening. And so my job was to go out there and educate. And I did a lot of, my marketing was all kind of guerrilla marketing. It was all grassroots. I went to all the baby mommy events. I went to, anything I could go to, so that I can talk to people face to face and teach them why they want this product over this product, And so I think it's absolutely similar in the cannabis space, which is, of course, I have to pick the most difficult industries to go into because it's not hard enough to be in business. But yeah, absolutely, like coming into this, it's very much about what I talked about earlier, which is teaching people, look, this is a supplement. This is something that goes into your bloodstream. This is going to affect the way you think. It's going to affect the way you feel in your body. And CBD is a little different than THC, where you get kind of more of that, what do they call it? God, I'm blanking.
The psychedelic effect, or
there are more of the effects on that level. But it's about teaching them the safety. We taught titrating, how to take, not take too much. Understand your body, your weight, how you metabolize things, understanding how things are affected with your liver, your lungs, because there's so many different ways to take cannabis now, right? We have topical, and not only, people, just to give some people a little perspective, people have been using THC products and topicals since like ancient Rome. We've been using these plants, right, as medicine for a very long time. It's only in the past 100 years where we've started to create this issue with using this plant. And so I think when you kind of understand that, and you can teach people about safety and using the product, you can hold people accountable when the legalization helps you hold people accountable. Because when you have the illicit market, people can sell you anything, right? They can sell you some other leaves with a little bit of the cannabis, they call that shake here, because they get a little bit of like the remnants of the weed, and then somebody adds something in there like oregano or something. I don't, it's just crazy the things you see. And it's really interesting. And now we have issues with like fentanyl overdoses here, right? Where they're adding these into all kinds of drugs. So the illicit market, unfortunately, unless your grower and the person that is producing for you, you're just getting some random person. It's not safe. And we create safety. We help our hospitals when we educate people, because now you don't have as many overdoses. You protect the people in your country when you're creating regulations and standards around things like this, because otherwise people are just going to take things and not think about it, and they're in pain, so they're going to just take this from this person off the street and trust it, and that's not always a good idea. Like we saw with the vapes here, you had all these off-market illicit companies, and people got sick from vapes. It wasn't the vapes that were being sold in the stores, and they didn't really cover that in the media. They just said vapes are unsafe, and it wasn't the companies that were creating regulated products. It was these off-market products. So I mean, that is, education is vital, right?
Where do you see the industry going? And I ask this also because obviously there's a lot of criticism, and now that it's legal, for medical use and hemp for industrial and food use, we, most of our clients who come from, especially, Oregon, California, even Florida, maybe the states that have more experience in these matters, they're saying, the market is overflowed, COVID hit us really bad, taking into account, and I know every state is different, and the licensing system is different. Some of it is, capped, others is open, and I think both things have pros and cons. But if you think as a market as a whole, how do you see the future of cannabis? And because I know the Costa Rican market, how do you see it going for Costa Rica from a personal standpoint?
But I mean, I think that there's a huge opportunity in Costa Rica when it comes to a couple of things. This is going to be, I think, one of the sticking points that's going to be hard. But when it comes to clinical trials and research, right? Population health in Costa Rica, I think there's a real opportunity, because for, it's a small country, right? And so there's an opportunity to actually, do clinical trials and research down there. So those areas of the market, I think there's a huge opportunity in with the hospitals, and, starting with a small scale, which is, studies in efficacy, right? So showing, how is your blood levels, like when I have this tablet, how quickly do I get, into my bloodstream and the effects. You can start to test, what's in the industry already, the oils, the topicals, and see, are we actually getting what we think we're getting out of this product, right? So that's a basic place to start. Sleep, there's another area, sleep, anxiety. There's so many areas that you can address, I think, in Costa Rica, that it's a little harder for us to do here, because just to do clinical trials in the US, I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars, right? And so there's an opportunity to address, that's an addressable market. Obviously, hemp, I think, is going to be, there's so much opportunity in hemp, carbon sequestering, that, you're not having to deal with the same issues as, medical marijuana, right? So fiber, right? So doing clothes, plastics, biodegradable plastics, all of that. There's a huge opportunity there for people. It's not just about, the CBD or the medical marijuana. There's lots of other things that are addressable, and I think easy entry points into the market. And I think that's something that Costa Rica's done well at, right? I think that you have agriculture down. Costa Rica, agriculture
country.
Right. And then I think the medical system there is a great medical system. We know that Costa Rica is one of the top medical systems in the world. So to be able to address that side of it and really build, I think, address these stigmas and show the safety of the product, and give people the opportunity to address some of these issues like sleep or anxiety with a really safe product. Xanax is not safe. Ambien is not safe. But if you could address some of those same issues with medical marijuana, wouldn't that be amazing, right? So, I think that, banking's a huge issue. We're going to have to address it. I'm hoping that in the next couple of years that it becomes less of an issue, and that the U.S. addresses it, because people are really waiting on the U.S. But in the meantime, I still think that there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And, at the end of the day, I think CBD is just going to become a supplement. You think of all these different CBN, CBG, all these derivatives, these cannabinoids, they're going to add a little of this, and then they're going to have this terpene over here, and then they're going to add that like L-theanine, and we're going to put a little bit of this. And pretty soon it's going to be like, here's your sleep combo, right? And it's not just CBD, it's a few different cannabinoids, and it's a few different herbs or supplements out there. And so, that's going to become a supplement. And I think it's going to be similar with marijuana. You're going to start to see people incorporating different ingredients, and just like anything, it's going to be their proprietary product, right? Because if everybody has a 5 milligram gummy, and they all taste exactly the same, there's no growth or differentiation there, right? But when you start to know that, wow, when I take this company's, it's a very different effect, right? And it's about their absorption rate, it's about the other ingredients they have in it. So you're going to see that shift happen in the next 10 years, 5 years, you're going to see that. And I don't think it's going to be so much about THC or CBD. It's going to really diversify.
I've learned so much through you since we met about the industry. So I'm just really glad we can get this out to everyone, to all our clients and friends, so they also learn about the industry. So just thank you, Kenda, for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Same. Like I was mentioning before, this is in fact a multi-million-dollar industry. Costa Rica can learn from the United States, we can learn from Israel, Canada, Europe, and every other Latin American country that has made it legal. However, we have a unique opportunity to make it ours, an opportunity to make it easier access for women in the cannabis industry, have it be equitable, have there be social equity, and have it be accessible to everyone. This is a very important step for Costa Rica, and we can make the best out of it.